Hey guys, my name is Lilly and today I want to document the evolution of the APO-1 survival knife, and these are all the stages that I had to go through to finally develop the APO-1 survival knife. So before we take a look at this knife here, I want to start at the very beginning when I was starting to design this knife. It actually took me 1.5 years to design the first prototype, which was this one. Actually, I had a prior prototype 0 I call it, because I never produced it and I was not happy about it at all, so it never went into production. And at first, when I contacted my factory in Taiwan, they first only offered knives with hollow grind, and this one is a hollow grind. And then I just stuck it into a log and I bend it over. And actually here you can see how tough AUS-8 is. AUS-8 is the steel that this knife is made in. And it's super tough, it doesn't break off easily. So the tip only bent over, which is a good sign for the steel, but it's bad because the hollow grind is making the very edge and the tip very weak. So I didn't want to have a knife in hollow grind. Hollow grind is great for kitchen knives, but for a survival knife, which is going to be put to its limit, I want to have a stable blade. So I want to have at least a flat grind or a saber grind, right? And then I designed this prototype, but before I could design this knife, I first had to design the handle. And yeah, these are the handle prototypes, which were 3D printed. And I gradually made the handle bigger. And at the end, I came to this handle here, which is really nice and very well fitting. And it's also very ergonomical, so you don't have any hard spots or anything. And yeah, after 1.5 years, finally, I got this knife here, which was the first proper APO-1 knife. And this is the very knife that I used for my Africa trip. I've used it extensively for 3 weeks. And at the end of the trip, we were coming to the coast, West Africa. And I've used this knife in salt water. So I completely submerged it and then I put it back into the sheath for 3 consecutive days. I just wanted to see how well the AUS-8 steel is resistant to salt water, which is very aggressive. And this is the result. So you can see some rust, and AUS-8 is stainless steel, but salt water is so aggressive that it even leaves a mark with stainless steel. And yeah, it's not too bad actually. I can scrape the rust off with my fingernail or with a little bit of baking soda. So the steel is fine, and if you use this steel around salt water, you just have to make sure that you wipe the blade off before you put it back into the sheath. So that's the only thing, but other than that, it held up great. The only thing that didn't held up great is the screws, because actually those were carbon screws, and at a later point I've changed them out to stainless steel screws. Okay, but this was the first proper APO-1. And it also came with micarta handles, which is a very nice looking material. And the only problem was that after I produced this knife, I realized that on some knives the micarta scales were lighter or much darker than with other knives. So the material was not consistent. And that's why in the end I've switched the handle material to G10, which is the very black one, and which came with a greater consistency. Yeah, so then after this model, actually there was a change in the factory. They have bought a different grinding machine, and I also wanted the knife to have a little bit of a better cutting capability. So I went up with the grind about 2 millimeters. And then the Saber Grind was bigger and the knife could cut a little bit better. But also with this change, the tip got a little bit thinner, And as a knife producer, you have to walk a thin line between stability and the ability to still carve and cut. So this was the APO-1 in Aus 8. And what I did next was I was bringing out the APO-1 in different steels. So this is K110, which is very similar or almost identical to D2 steel. And it's a tool steel, but as you can see here with this blade, it's pretty rusty. And that's because I've tried out this knife in Costa Rica and I've used it at the seaside. I've submerged it into seawater and then I put it back into the sheath without drying it off. And this is what the salt water did to this blade in only 1 day. So this was only a special edition because some people requested a different steel, and that's okay. But for me, a survival knife should be a stainless steel, because in a survival situation you don't have the time to take care of your knife so much. And what if you don't have some lubricant with you? Then you will get a rusty blade, and that's not good for the knife, of course. And then when you come home from the trip, you cry because your knife is rusty like hell. I brought this knife out because some customers wanted it, but I think for a survival knife, a rusting steel or even a half rusting steel is not perfect. And the same goes for this knife. This here is SK85, which is almost identical to SK5. It's a carbon steel, so it's not stainless steel at all. And look how much rust this got on now. With this knife, I didn't even see salt water. I just opened up a package of sausages. Then I forgot to dry off the blade and I just put it back into the sheath, and overnight it rusted like this. And there were only a couple of drops of water on the blade, and see how bad the knife looks now. Unbelievable. So I don't know why people love rusting blades so much. I don't understand it. It's just a nuisance for me, and I don't think a survival knife should have a rusting blade. I think stainless steel is the way to go, like this knife here. This still looks like the best steel if you compare it to these two. And it's only a little bit rusty, although I had it submerged in salt water for 3 days. And this surface rust you can easily get off, no problem. Yeah, so because these two steels were so rusty, and yeah, I just didn't want to sell them anymore. So these two steels were a limited edition, and if in future I'm going to produce the knife in a different steel, it's only going to be a stainless steel. Oh yeah, and then there's one more thing. So after the second version, this version here was a little bit different, because actually in the factory they got a different angle grinder, a better one, and then they could do this corner a little bit more straight. So here you can see that the grind is a little bit in an angle here. And then with the new grinding machine, they could finally do a 90 degrees angle almost. So I think this is a little bit nicer. And that's why we kept it this way. So this was the APO-1. At the end it came with 3 different steels. But because of these extensive rust problems, I decided to go for the Aus 8 only. And this here is not rust. This is actually resin from a tree. And it's dirty. So next, then I came out with the APO-1H. This was the smaller version, because in Germany and in other countries you're not allowed to walk around with knives that have a longer blade than 12 centimeters, and this smaller knife is exactly 12 centimeters. And yeah, just basically made it for people who either are not allowed to run around with such a big blade, or for people who don't want to run around with such a big blade. Some people just want to have smaller knives, and that's why I have designed this knife for. Also, I wanted this to be the better carver, so I've told my factory to make the edge finer than with the APO-1, for example. And this is now a knife which is going to carve better, and also it has a finer tip. So this is really to skin some animals. So this is the small version, the APO-1 Hunter. Okay, so after the APO-1, some customers sent me feedback, and there were some men who said to me that my handle was too small. So some men thought that the handle is too short, and then I thought, yeah, maybe I should make the knife a little bit bigger. So then I came out with the APO-1S, which is the bigger version of the original APO-1. So here you can see that the new handle then was a little bit longer, but because I made the handle longer, I also had to make the blade longer. So now the blade of the knife was 5 or 7 millimeters longer as well. And then the new version of the APO-1 was born, and I called this the APO-1S. So now I have two versions, the APO-1S and the APO-1 Hunter. The Hunter is the smaller version, it's more for skinning, and the APO-1S is a pure survival knife. So then this knife was produced, and as you notice, I also came out with a darker version. So this is the satin version, and I also came out with a black finish version. This is for people who don't want to have a shiny blade, which is better for being stealthy. And yeah, this is the satin version, and some people just like shiny blades more. You can also use this as a signal mirror, for example. So this is really personal preference. And I actually started with the black blade very early in the production history. So the second version of the APO-1 also had a black blade. Yeah, so then the APO-1S came out and the customers loved it. And then I still got a couple of customer wishes, and they said that they would like to have a little bit of a thicker handle now. And then I came out with the last version of the APO-1S, which now has a thicker handle and also a green liner in between the tang and the handle scales. Yeah, so now it's looking like this. And there are also two versions available, the satin version and the black version. And this is the final version of the APO-1S. So I don't think I can make it better again. It's perfect. So the handle thickness is perfect. Also, the tip thickness is now a little bit thicker than these versions here. And I just wanted to have a really thick tip to make sure that it doesn't break off when you are batoning or when you're searching for grubs in the wood. This is not truly the one knife that I would choose in the apocalypse. And the steel is again Aus 8. So now I want to talk about the features of this knife a little bit. Why have I designed it the way it is? Okay, so why have I designed the knife the way it is? I wanted to develop a knife which is functional and robust at the same time, which can be used for very hard tasks like batoning or for searching grubs or even for digging in the ground. So the main goal was a knife which can survive very tough environments and tasks, which is basically the one knife that I would take with me in the apocalypse. So first off, I decided to go with a Saber Grind because a Saber Grind is very robust, and the thickness of the back goes down all the way to here. So it's going to be a really thick blade until here. And actually you need a thick chunk of steel if you want to baton with a knife, because then you have less chance of breaking. And that was the reason why I went for the Saber Grind. And you could also go for a full flat grind, but the flat grind starts up here and I think it's less stable. So I rather wanted to have the Saber Grind because I think it's perfect for a survival knife. And yeah, as you can see, the knife is full tang. So the tang goes all the way around the handle scales and it's not a stick tang. I've seen a couple of knives breaking off which had a stick tang. A stick tang is basically just a small part of steel which goes back into the handle, and it's not suitable for survival knives in my opinion. So full tang is the way to go, and Saber Grinds is one of my favorite and one of the most stable grinds, which can be easily made with a grinding machine. I've decided to go with a very thick edge, and also I wanted to have a stable tip which is rather thick. Then I wanted to have a handle which is very comfortable, because if you have corners in the handle you will get bladders easily, which then can get infected, and in a survival situation that can mean death. And this is why I went for a handle which is tapered in both directions, so you have a nice ergonomical line here, but also you have a tapered handle if you look from the top. So here the handle is quite thick, then it gets thinner, then it's getting thicker again, thinner. Then also I wanted to have the handle come out at the end, because I want to be able to take the knife with only 2 fingers at the right side and the thumb on the left side. And this way you can chop trees, okay, because you have more leverage than if you're just holding the knife like this. You can also chop like this, but you will have more leverage here, and then you have a more efficient chopper, similar to a machete or to a small kukri. So this is why I have designed the handle the way it is, and it comes out here. And then with this small hook here, you won't lose the knife when you're chopping away. And yeah, so that's the feature that I wanted to have. This is the reason why the knife handle is getting thicker at the end and also here at the side. Then at the end I wanted to have something that sticks out, some kind of emergency hammer, so that you can smash off some limpets off a stone, or in an urban survival situation you can smash a window with it. But I didn't want to have a point at the end, because actually then you cannot take the knife in reverse grip anymore. So I wanted to be able to put my thumb on the emergency hammer without getting hurt. So now you can take the knife in reverse and put your thumb onto the emergency hammer, and then you will have more control over the knife, especially when you're stabbing in reverse grip. You can then have a little bit more security so that you don't slide down on the handle. And then I got a thumb rail here, because I think it's nice to have one. Not everybody agrees with this, and that's fine, but sometimes I just like to put my hand onto the back of the knife, and then I would like to have a little bit more grip, and this way I can carve much better. And if this is too aggressive, you can always take a small file like this one here, and you can make the thumb rail a little bit less aggressive by filing off the corners. That's something that you can do, and as I said before, not everybody likes this, but I think it's still great to have. And also I can shave off some small tiny shavings off of fat wood, for example. So I like this thing here. Then next I've made the back of the knife very sharp, and that's because I want the knife to be able to strike a fire steel very well. Some knives don't have that, and it's really a nuisance to get the fire steel started. And what people do then is they switch to using the edge of the knife, because the back doesn't work, and then you will damage the heat treatment of the blade, because the heat of the fire steel is not good for the edge. So this is why you want to make a very sharp 90 degrees angle on the back side, and this way you will strike a fire steel very well. Okay, so this was it about the knife, about the design. And now I want to come to the pricing a little bit. So what I had to learn is that when you work with a small knife factory like me, my knife factory is basically a small family business with only 1 or 2 workers, you're never going to have the cheap price that the bigger brands are going to have. And also the fact that I only order a small amount of knives each time, this is raising the price. The next thing is, every grinding jig that you need is going to cost you money. I used at least 5 or 6 grinding jigs for the blade here, and then I used a couple of more grinding jigs for the handle scales, and they have to be redone after every change of the design, so that's going to cost you a lot of money. And that's not even all. So this was actually the most expensive thing to make. And nylon injected sheaths are not easy to make. They need a lot of tries to get it right. And the mold for these sheaths costs thousands of dollars. And besides, you also have to brand your knife, and then you have to pay money to lawyers so that the brand is protected. And that's also going to cost thousands of dollars for US, Canada, Europe. So before I produced the first knives, I already had thousands of dollars spent. Then the next thing is the handle. The handle here is actually sanded down by hand. So initially the handle is cut out with CNC, and it's made a little bit bigger than the tang itself. And then a worker at the factory is going to take a sandpaper and he's sanding down the knife handle with the hand. And then you don't have an edge between the knife handle and the tang. And this is really expensive because for every handle, one worker needs half an hour of work. So basically this knife is semi-custom. It's not full factory produced because a worker has to go and sand down the handle. So this is the reason why my knife is a little bit more pricey. So some people say, hey, your knife is more expensive, although Aus 8 in general is not as expensive as other steels, and that is correct. But the steel is only a small part of the cost calculation. Alright, so now I want to show you a cheaper handle, which is so cheap that the knife only costs like 45 euros if you buy it. This here is the Glock field knife, and it's super cheap. Now, why is it so cheap? So first of all, you have less steel, it's thinner, then you only have a stick tang, and they have this very cheap finger guard here, and then they have this very, very cheap handle. If you have a handle like this, yeah, then you can go down with the price. So initially it's going to be more expensive to make a handle like this because you need a mold. So you make the mold once, but then you can produce thousands of these plastic handles, and then you just stick it over the tang, glue it together with the tang, and that's it. So you don't have any work anymore with sanding the handle, and you can make this knife really quickly. So let's say the mold costs $10,000, but after you produce 10,000 knives, it will only cost you $1 anymore per knife. And the material cost itself for this plastic is about $1.5 to $2, and that's it. And this is why these knives are so cheap, because you don't have a workforce that has to sand down a handle anymore. And I wanted to produce a quality knife with a quality handle, and that means that somebody has to sand down the handle to the steel. G10 is very robust, it's almost indestructible, and the most important thing is that the handle fits the tang perfectly. And what some companies do is they make a scale like this, but they make it slightly smaller so they don't have to sand down the handle, and then you will have a small corner, and then when you're using the knife it's going to hurt. In my opinion, that's a really cheap way of how to deal with the handle situation. This is the reason why my knife is a little bit more expensive, because I rather go for quality than quantity, and I want to have a perfectly sanded down handle. That's my honest opinion, and it's going to cost more, and that's why I will never be able to compete with a knife like this. This knife costs less in the store than my knife costs in the production, much less. Okay, so before I end the video, I would like to talk about cost and taxes. Some people just don't realize how much tax there is on things that you sell in a store. So when I'm producing these knives in Taiwan, I have to pay the shipping to Austria. Then I have to pay customs, which is about 6.5%, which is going to raise the price and the cost of the knife. Then when I'm selling the knife, within Europe, I have to add 20% of VAT, which is a value-added tax that is paid by the customer, and I have to give this money to the government, so I don't keep the money, this 20%. So then at the end, I'm left with a little bit of a profit margin, and of this profit margin, I have to deduct 50% of income tax and social security tax. And with what it's left, it's just a little bit of a side income for me. So I'm not getting rich with making or producing these knives. It's just a little bit of a side income, and the profit is minimal. It's not a lot. And I only buy a couple of hundred knives each time I order the knives. And that's why my knife is never going to be as cheap as this knife here. The next thing is that in Europe we have higher taxes than in the US. Taxes are insane in Europe. That's why some of the US Americans are shocked when they are seeing prices in Europe. It's not only about the knives, it's about everything. Computers, cameras, everything is much, much more expensive in Europe, and that's because of the taxes in Europe. At the end of the video, I would like to say that I believe my knife is in the medium price range. There are cheaper knives, but there are also more expensive knives. And I think the performance ability of my knife is justified for the price. And I think for about $150 you will get a knife which is going to last you a lifetime. And there's one more thing that I would like to say about the screws. So my company is using Loctite on the screws, but you should always make sure that they are tight, because sometimes when you're chopping and batoning, the blade will vibrate back to the screws, and it can be that the screws will loosen itself over time, over the years. So every now and then make sure that you control if the screws are really tight, and if not, you can tighten the screws with a hex key of 2.5 millimeters in diameter. Okay, so if you're interested in the survival knife, then make sure that you check out the links in the description below. And actually, this is one of the most sold survival knives at CanadianPreparedness.com, which is my dealer in Canada. So my store only sells to Europe anymore, and if you are from overseas, US, America, or Canada, New Zealand, Australia, then please buy at my Canadian merchant, which is CanadianPreparedness.com. Okay, so this is it. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned till next time.